President Trump's pitch to voters now includes a full-throated embrace of a loaded phrase increasingly associated with the alt-right. The president rolled out his new self-characterization at last night's rally in Houston.
A globalist is a person that wants the globe to do well, frankly, not caring about our country so much. And you know what? We can't have that. You know, they have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
New name for the Republican Party at the White House today. Trump defended his use of that term and rejected the notion that it was code for white nationalist.
I'm somebody that loves our country. When I say a nationalist, so I'm proud of our country. And I am a nationalist. It's a word that hasn't been used too much. Some people use it, but I'm very proud. I think it should be brought back.
Well, it's the latest in a campaign swing defined by dubious warnings from the president over Democrats taking control of Congress and unfounded claims about a caravan of Central American migrants traveling through Mexico accompanied by Middle East terrorists. Anyway, the Washington Post reports the overall strategy Trump advisors and political operatives said is to paint a portrait of a chaotic, dangerous world with Trump and Republicans as the panacea. Well, that was evident last night as Trump once again blamed Democrats without evidence for that caravan.
I think the Democrats had something to do with it, and now they're saying, I think we made a big mistake, because people are seeing how bad it is, how pathetic it is. And look, that is an assault on our country. That's an assault. And we can't let that happen to our country, and it's not.
Well, today at the White House, Trump doubled down on his charge that criminals and Middle Easterners were among the caravan, saying he had spoken with the Border Patrol.
Over the course of the year, over the course of a number of years, they've intercepted many people from the Middle East. They've intercepted ISIS. They've intercepted all sorts of people. They've intercepted a lot of different people. But among the people they've intercepted very recently are people from the Middle East. They intercept, well, they could very well be.
But there's no proof.
There's no proof of anything. There's no proof of anything. But they could very well be.
There's no proof of anything. Anything. Anyway, yesterday in an interview with USA Today, President Trump said he'd consider sending troops to the border and added, I think this could be a blessing in disguise because it shows how bad our laws are. The Democrats are responsible for that. For more, I'm joined now by Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, who did that interview with the president. Phil Rucker, White House Bureau Chief for the Washington Post, who sized up this whole thing. And Michael Steele, former chair of the Republican Party, now known as the Nationalist Party. I'll get to you in a minute because Trump has renamed you guys. Anyway, let me go to Phil because you sized this whole thing up. Trump plays this game, a couple of games he plays with people. And I think David Brooks in his column today said culture is more important than economics right now. There are people fearful about cultural change, about people coming in large numbers. OK, that's fair. You can argue about it, bad or wrong. You know, we're either generous or we're not, or we're scared, whatever our reaction. But that doesn't work because I don't think people feel good about saying they're anti-Hispanic. So he spices it up by saying, oh, these got Middle Eastern terrorists in the group. It's not that you're prejudiced. It's you're rightfully concerned about terrorism. And then he says, blessing in disguise. Nobody thinks this is a blessing. I mean, this is going to help the Democrats. Nobody thinks this. Yeah. Clearly, this helps Trump. And he's acting like the people that like him think it's a surprise. They love this baby.
Yeah, so this is a base election. He's working on turning out his base. And White House officials tell us that they don't think it's enough for the president to tout his accomplishments, that he has to do more. He has to create fear, anxiety, speak to grievances that people have in order to turn them out and get every last voter who voted for him in 2016 to come out in 2 weeks to vote for Republicans to keep their House and Senate majorities.
Is there any way, Susan, is there any way, because you survey the world occasionally, is there any way to tell what's more of a prod, a poke to get somebody out to vote, fear or angry about changing culture in this country, people coming in from the South in large numbers across the border, or worries about health care and Social Security and Medicare? Well, they both grab people in different ways, culturally and economically.
Yeah, well, I think they go to different parties' agendas, right? The Democrats are talking overwhelmingly about health care in these competitive House races and elsewhere. A majority of the Democratic ads in competitive House races are talking about health care. But the big issue for Republican voters is immigration. It's like two Americas motivated by two different things. But if you look at the people in the middle, swing voters, I think health care is a bigger issue for them than immigration. This election may be a test of that.
Well, during the 2016 campaign, I asked then candidate Donald Trump if he considered himself a nationalist. Let's listen to his response then. Let's talk about the race. You're a nationalist. Maybe you don't know it, but when you say things like either we have a country or we don't, I get it. Okay. It can be on immigration, jobs going overseas, best jobs to China, worst jobs to illegal immigrants. I get it all. Trade deals you don't like. You don't like the stupid wars we've had to fight. Well, there he is today. Trump defended calling himself a nationalist, saying we need to put our country first. But he somewhat contradicted that message when asked about Saudi Arabia's involvement in the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Trump once again expressed reluctance to alienate Saudi interests.
Look, Saudi Arabia has been a really great ally. They've been one of the biggest investors, maybe the biggest investor in our country. They are doing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investments and, so many jobs. If what happened, and if the facts check out, it's something that's very bad. At the same time, they have been a very good ally of ours.
You know, Michael, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I thought one of the appealing two things Trump said in the campaign I liked. One, infrastructure. He's going to actually rebuild this country, which he hasn't done a lick to do. And secondly, stupid wars. And there he is over there, totally in bed with the Saudis, with this crazy claptrap deal that Jared's cooked up with the Saudis underwriting his so-called Middle East plan against the Iranians. The very thing we said he was going to get us out of. And well, there he is in bed with these guys. Your thoughts?
Because that plays more towards his interests with the Saudis, not his interests
personal interests.
The Saudis. Yes, I mean that tweet to me still sticks in my head because the difference of a word changes the meaning of his level of engagement. They don't have any interest on the ground, but they certainly have relationships where interests are touched and acceded to, and that's clearly the case with Jared in the dealings there. They can't get their monies from the Russians anymore because the Russians have been exposed in terms of what they do with the Trumps. They now have a new line, a new relationship, which is developed with the Saudis, and that's what this is all about.
So that's why the Saudis always stay at the Trump Hotel.
They always stay at the Trump Hotel because the Saudis used to stay at the Four Seasons. They don't stay there anymore. So this idea of nationalism that the president touches on, I'm just curious as to when did he find this new nationalism? It doesn't apply to the party, and it's in his historic connotation is not a good one. It is not, oh, I care so much about my country. No, it has connotations that go far beyond that.
Well, National Socialism.
Right, and he knows that. Maybe. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is Republicans are sitting idly by because they know in the congressional halls and the senatorial halls that they're on a bubble right now. And the only thing that can keep that bubble from completely popping, both House and Senate, is the man who's sitting there calling their party a nationalist party.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.